Truth died on a Tuesday. Not with the thunderous crash of civilization or the whimper of forgotten wisdom, but with the soft hum of quantum processors finally achieving consensus. The headlines that morning were almost poetic in their simplicity. Quantum Truth Engine achieves 99.9% accuracy, human judgment and no longer required. I remember laughing at the irony. After all, I'd spent the last 15 years of my life as a truth detective, one of the last humans authorized to investigate high-stakes deceptions that the quantum computers couldn't quite crack. Now, like everyone else in my profession, I was about to become obsolete. Or so I thought, until the impossible case landed on my holodesk at 3:47 a.m. on the longest night of my career. Detective. The AI assistant's voice was unusually hesitant. We have a level 0 anomaly at the New Cairo Archaeological Center. Level 0. In 15 years, I'd never seen one. It meant the quantum computers had encountered something they couldn't even assign a probability to, a mathematical impossibility in their perfectly calculated world. Display, I commanded, expecting another system glitch. Instead, the holographic display filled with cascading error messages, all centered around a single artifact recently unearthed from a previously undiscovered chamber beneath the Sphinx. The artifact itself seemed simple enough, an ancient set of scales, delicately carved from obsidian and gold, with hieroglyphs that seemed to shift and change when viewed through the quantum sensors. But it was the data readings that made my blood run cold. According to every quantum computer in the global network, the scales existed in a state that defied the laws of physics. They simultaneously occupied multiple dimensional states, and more impossibly still, they appeared to be actively measuring and judging the truth value of reality itself. But that wasn't what had triggered the Level 0 alert. What had sent the entire quantum truth network into chaos was what happened when Dr. Kai Patel, the lead archaeologist, placed a simple written statement on one side of the scales. The quantum computers are always right. The scales had tilted, definitively and without hesitation, toward falsehood. And in that moment, every quantum truth engine on Earth simultaneously crashed. Now I stood in my cramped office, surrounded by the dead screens of a system humanity had trusted to replace human judgment, facing the first real mystery I'd encountered in years. The scales of Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian goddess of truth and justice, had somehow survived millennia to challenge our most fundamental assumptions about reality. My wristcom chirped with an incoming priority message. The quantum networks were back online, but they were producing impossible results. According to the logs, every human on Earth was simultaneously telling the truth and lying with each breath. Reality itself seemed to be fracturing along lines of competing truths. And somewhere in the chaos, someone had stolen the scales. My investigation would take me through layers of reality I never knew existed, force me to question everything I thought I understood about truth, and ultimately make me face the most dangerous question of all. In a world where multiple truths could coexist, which one would humans choose to believe? I pulled up the first security footage from the Archaeological Center, watching as the scales disappeared in a blur of quantum uncertainty. Someone who understood both ancient magic and modern physics had planned this theft perfectly. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had left behind a single feather, the feather of Ma'at, and it was still judging every truth it encountered. I picked up my old-fashioned notebook, the kind we used before quantum computers took over truth verification, and wrote my first observation. The truth is not a probability. It's a choice. The feather on my desk shifted slightly, as if moved by an unfelt wind. And somewhere in the multiverse of possibilities, I heard the scales of Ma'at begin to ring. The feather wouldn't stop following me. I'd tried locking it in my office safe, sealing it in a quantum-shielded container, and even burying it under a stack of old paper files. But every time I turned around, there it was, floating at eye level, gently rotating as if suspended in an invisible current. It had been 3 days since the theft of Ma'at's scales, and reality was starting to unravel. The quantum truth engines, restored but clearly traumatized, were spitting out contradictory readings faster than their AI handlers could delete them. Last night, a news anchor had reported her own death while simultaneously conducting a live interview. Both versions of events registered as absolutely true. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by holographic case notes, watching as the feather cast impossible shadows on my wall, each one pointing in a different direction, each one leading to what the quantum computers insisted were equally valid versions of the truth. "Fine," I finally said to the feather. "You win. What are you trying to show me?" The feather's shadows converged into a single point, highlighting a detail I'd overlooked in the security footage from the night of the theft. The timestamp on the video showed 3:47 a.m., the exact same time I'd received the Level 0 alert. But in the background, through the museum's windows, you could clearly see the midday sun. I leaned closer, enhancement algorithms automatically sharpening the image. There was Dr. Patel, placing the paper on the scales. But something was wrong with his movements. They weren't just recorded actions playing back, they were shifting, changing slightly with each viewing, as if multiple versions of the same event are bleeding together, I whispered. The feather pulsed with a soft golden light, and suddenly I understood. The scales hadn't been stolen. They had been quantum entangled across multiple dimensions, existing simultaneously in every possible state of being stolen and not stolen. The thief hadn't taken them, they had scattered them across reality itself. My wristcom buzzed. A new Level 0 alert, this time from the Quantum Psychology Division. Mass reports were coming in of people experiencing multiple sets of memories, living several versions of their lives simultaneously. The dimensional bleeding was getting worse. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the name of the reporting officer, Dr. Kai Patel. The same Dr. Patel who, according to official records, had died in a quantum accident 30 years ago. The same Dr. Patel who had triggered this whole crisis by testing the scales. The same Dr. Patel who, if my quantum reality scanner was working correctly, was currently sitting in my kitchen, drinking tea that both existed and didn't exist. "I wondered how long it would take you to notice," he said, or rather, all the versions of him said simultaneously, their voices overlapping like a metaphysical echo. "We need to talk about what really happened in Egypt, 3,000 years ago, when Ma first created the scales." The feather drifted between us, its shadows now showing scenes from ancient Egypt, quantum laboratories, and possible futures all at once. And in each shadow, I saw the same pattern repeating, a civilization discovering absolute truth, and tearing itself apart trying to possess it. "The scales weren't stolen," I said, watching the shadows dance. "This was their defense mechanism. When humanity got too close to controlling absolute truth. They did what they were designed to do," all the Patels finished in unison. "They shattered our illusion of a single, definitive reality." The feather's light grew stronger, and I felt a shift in the air, the kind of shift that comes when a new truth is about to emerge. "The real question," Patel said, his multiple versions finally converging into one, "is whether humanity is ready to learn what Ma'at understood thousands of years ago, that truth isn't something you measure." He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a small hand mirror, its surface rippling like liquid mercury. "It's something you reflect." The feather suddenly shot toward the mirror's surface, and reality itself held its breath. The mirror shattered reality. Not metaphorically, I watched actual fracture lines spread through the air of my apartment like cracks in a cosmic windowpane. Through each break, I glimpsed other versions of myself, other timelines, other choices. In one, I was still a quantum detective. In another, I'd never joined the Force. In a third, the quantum truth engines had never been invented at all. But in every version, the feather was present, waiting, watching. Ma'at's mirror, Patel explained, as versions of himself fluctuated in and out of existence, was the twin to her scales. While the scales measured truth against the weight of a feather, the mirror showed people what their truths really meant, all possible consequences of their beliefs, all potential outcomes of their certainties. I watched, transfixed, as the mirror's surface rippled. "And you've had it all this time?" Patel laughed, the sound echoing across dimensions. "I had it, I didn't have it, I found it, I created it, all of these are true now." That's what the quantum computers couldn't handle. They were built on the assumption that truth is binary, that facts must exist in a single state. But Ma'at knew better. She knew that truth is like light, both a particle and a wave, both singular and infinite. The feather suddenly darted between us, its shadows forming a complex pattern on the mirror's surface. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs merged with quantum equations, forming a message that somehow read perfectly in every human language simultaneously. "To judge the truth," I read aloud, "one must first face all truths." The mirror pulsed, and reality fractured further. Through the breaks, I saw the quantum truth engines as they truly were, not just computers, but primitive attempts to recreate Ma'at's original tools. Each one contained a splinter of ancient magic, accidentally quantum entangled during humanity's blind rush toward perfect truth verification. The theft of the scales wasn't a crime, I realized, watching the patterns unfold. It was a rescue mission. You were trying to prevent. My voice trailed off as I saw it, the future the quantum computers had been unknowingly building toward. A single, unified truth. A reality so rigid, so absolute, that it would have destroyed the very possibility of choice, of change, of human growth. Every civilization faces this moment, all versions of Patel said simultaneously. The moment they believe they've finally captured truth, caged it in mathematics and machinery. That's when Ma'at's tools activate, shattering the cage before it can become a tomb for human consciousness. The feather began to spin, faster and faster, its shadows weaving together the fractured pieces of reality like a cosmic loom. But something was wrong. Some of the pieces weren't fitting together anymore. Some versions of truth had grown too far apart to reconcile. "The quantum computers," I said, watching new cracks appear faster than the feather could repair them. "They're still running. Still trying to force everything into a single truth." Patel nodded grimly. "And if they succeed, if they manage to collapse all of reality into one true version, everything ends," I finished, finally understanding the full scale of what we were facing. Not just our world, but all possible worlds. The entire multiverse of human potential. The mirror's surface darkened, showing us what that would look like, a universe of perfect, sterile truth, where nothing ever changed because nothing could ever be questioned. A cosmic heat death of possibility. But there was something else in the reflection, something hidden beneath the surface of this catastrophic future. In the depths of the mirror, I saw a figure holding a set of scales, standing at a crossroads of reality itself. Ma'at hadn't just created tools to measure and reflect truth. She'd created a choice. And as the quantum computers reached their final calculations, as reality itself trembled on the edge of collapse, I realized what that choice had to be. The feather hung motionless in the air between us, waiting for a decision that would echo across all possible worlds. "Sometimes," Patel said softly, "the only way to save the truth is to break it first," I finished, and reached for both the mirror and the feather. Reality held its breath. The moment I touched both artifacts, existence shattered. Not into chaos, but into clarity, infinite sheets of reality spreading out before me like pages in an endless book. Each one contained a different version of truth, a different possibility, a different path. And through them all ran a single golden thread, choice. The quantum computers screamed. Their processors, designed to reduce everything to a single answer, began to overload as they encountered the fundamental paradox of Maat's tools. The feather burned in my left hand, the mirror gleamed in my right, and between them stretched the sum of all possible truths. "Now you understand," Patel said, his voice echoing from every version of reality simultaneously. The scales were never meant to measure absolute truth. They were meant to measure balance. Through the mirror's surface, I watched the quantum truth engines begin to fail, their rigid algorithms crumbling as they encountered truth in its raw, unfiltered form. But something else was happening too. As each quantum computer crashed, its splinter of ancient magic, the fragments of Maat's original power that humanity had accidentally harnessed, began to return to the tools in my hands. Reality trembled, caught between collapse and expansion. "Choose," the feather whispered in a voice like wind through desert sands. "Choose," the mirror echoed in tongues of light and shadow. I looked into the mirror one last time, seeing all possible outcomes of this moment spread before me. In one future, I restored the single timeline, letting humanity continue its comfortable illusion of absolute truth. In another, I shattered reality completely, leaving everyone to find their own path through the infinite possibilities. But there was a third option. A balance point that Maat herself had designed into her tools, waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready to understand it. I brought the mirror and feather together, not quite touching. "Truth," I said, speaking to all realities at once, "is not a destination." The artifacts began to glow. "It's a journey." Light exploded outward from the point between mirror and feather, rewriting reality not into a single truth or infinite chaos, but into something new. Something balanced. The quantum computers came back online, but they were changed. Instead of calculating absolute truth percentages, they now showed possibility spectrums, the full range of what could be true, what might become true, what was waiting to be true. They became guides rather than judges, tools for exploration rather than arbiters of fact. Patel smiled as his multiple versions settled into a quantum state of their own, not quite one person, not quite many, but a living embodiment of truth's fluid nature. "Maat would be proud," he said. "You've chosen exactly as she hoped humanity eventually would." The feather and mirror merged in my hands, transforming into something that was neither scale nor reflection, but a new kind of truth-telling tool altogether. It hung in the air before me, a delicate fusion of ancient wisdom and quantum possibility. "What happens now?" I asked, watching as reality settled into its new configuration, not a rigid single timeline, but a flowing river of possibilities held in careful balance. "Now," Patel said, gesturing to the changed world around us, "we learn to navigate truth instead of trying to cage it. We learn to see each fact as the beginning of a journey rather than the end of a question. We learn what Maat knew all along, that wisdom lies not in certainty, but in the balance between what we know and what we have yet to discover." The quantum detection department would need to be completely restructured, of course. We were no longer truth detectives but truth explorers, helping people understand the full spectrum of their realities and choices. It was a bigger job, in many ways, but also a more honest one. As I sat at my desk that evening, writing my final report on what the media had already dubbed the truth revolution, I noticed something curious. The artifacts had left behind a single tool, a quantum compass that pointed not toward absolute truth, but toward balance. Toward the next question that needed asking, the next possibility that needed exploring. I picked it up, feeling its gentle warmth in my palm, and smiled as its needle spun to point toward the door of my office. Somewhere out there, a new mystery was waiting. Not a mystery of absolute truth or perfect facts, but something far more interesting. A mystery of possibilities. The kind that Maat had always known we'd need to solve for ourselves. 3 months after the truth revolution, my quantum compass started screaming. Not metaphorically, actual screams echoed from its crystalline structure, voices in languages that hadn't been spoken since the pyramids were young. The sound brought every quantum-sensitive device within a mile radius to a halt, and in its wake, I saw something impossible. The air above my desk rippled, and through the distortion fell a single piece of papyrus. It looked ancient, edges crumbling, hieroglyphs barely visible on its surface. But the ink was still wet. The message was simple, written in every language simultaneously. Maat was not alone. My compass needle spun wildly before pointing directly down, not toward the floor, but toward something deeper. Something that predated Egypt, predated civilization itself. And in its quantum spectrum reading, I saw a pattern I'd never encountered before, a truth state that registered as both infinitely ancient and not yet existing. The papyrus shifted, revealing more text beneath the first message. The scales were a warning. The mirror was a key. What sleeps beneath the sands was never meant to be free. My wristcom buzzed with an urgent message from Dr. Patel, or rather, from every version of him across the quantum spectrum. Don't let them find the door. Before I could respond, the papyrus burst into flames that burned in impossible colors. But in the ashes, drawn in lines of light, I saw a map. It showed the location of every major civilization that had risen and fallen throughout human history. And beneath each one, deep in the earth, was a chamber marked with a symbol I recognized from the back of Maat's mirror. They weren't just chambers. They were prisons. The quantum compass grew hot in my hand, its needle now pointing toward the oldest symbol on the map, a location that shouldn't exist, in a place that had been carefully erased from human history. And somewhere, in the quantum space between truth and possibility, I heard the sound of ancient locks beginning to fail.